Today is the second day of Ramadan here in Dubai. And usually Ramadan is the time for stories since very old times. Since very old times, after iftar, the meal that breaks the fast, it's custom to sit in a circle to tell and listen to traditional stories. And every year here in Dubai, we had gigs every night and we enjoyed so much the vibe and the sharing of food and stories. But now, in Ramadan 2020, we are forbidden to do so because of COVID-19. Still, I miss so much this tradition that I really want to tell some stories to bring them to people's houses to listen after their iftar. And now this story came to my mind today after a long time I didn't tell it. I think it came to my heart because it speaks about what we miss the most. We Christians missed it for our Easter, and now our Muslim brothers and sisters are missing it dearly during Ramadan. Togetherness, hospitality, and sharing, because these are the values of our religious festivities. So I'm telling this story with a great wish that we can all soon open our houses again to guests, to family, friends, and even strangers. Once upon a time, in the south of Italy, there was a village called Trecina. And this village was beautiful because it stood right in front of the sea. And from each and every house of the village, you could enjoy a breathtaking sea view. But now, if you go there, it's not like that anymore. Actually, the village is surrounded by 5 mountains and 2 lower hills, preventing the eye to look at the sea. And this is because once upon a time in the past, when the village was happy and plenty of nice people ready to share and having hospitality as a sacred virtue, in that time the old, wise and good king died, and in his place came to rule his son. Now his son was young and rich and powerful, but not like his father. He was mean and cruel, and so was his wife and his 3 sons. This new king, he believed that everything in the village and in his kingdom belonged to him and himself only. And he thought that whoever would share something or give away something to guests or strangers would waste his own possessions. And therefore, he came out with a law that forbade anyone to welcome any guest nor share food, drinks, or shelter. And now the village that had always been cheerful and full of laughter and merriment became sad and silent. And people started being barred in their houses for fear of anyone who could enter through their doors, because the king had made it very clear, whoever will be found out with a guest in the house would be put to death. And now one evening, shortly after sunset, a stranger came to the village. He was poorly dressed, with a scrubby cloak around his shoulders, wearing worn-out sandals like a pilgrim or a holy man. And now the stranger, he clearly did not know anything about the king's order, because he started knocking at each and every door in the village, asking for a piece of bread, something to eat. But the people inside, although they would have loved to open their houses and prepare a feast for the guest, they were too scared to open or to even answer. And the stranger kept banging and banging on each and every door of the village. And he was surprised that nobody would answer, nobody would welcome him. He knew that that was a land famous for its hospitality and sharing. And when he came to the end of the village, one brave person told him through barred windows, "We would love to open to you and make you welcome, but our king had forbidden us to have any guest, nor to share any food nor drink. Go to his palace and see if you can move his heart and soften his will." So the stranger, he climbed all the way up to the hill where the royal palace stood, and when he got there, he started banging at the big wooden door. And after some minutes of waiting, all of a sudden the big door bursted open, and there stood the king with his mean wife and mean children in front of him, and next to them their two cruel dogs. The king looked at the stranger with selfish eyes, and he said, "How do you dare to come and knock at my door begging for food?" The stranger looked at him with peace in his eyes, and he stretched his hands and he said, "Just a piece of bread." But the king came forward and he kicked the stranger in the stomach. And his wife, when she saw this, she punched his face. And so did the 3 sons. They all came forward and they beated the poor man. Seeing that the 2 dogs understood the order, they came forward as well and they beat at the legs of the stranger. The stranger then, he turned his back to the royal family. He lifted his hands to the sky and he said, "If there's no food for the Son of God, for a holy man, there will be no food for the children of man and the man of power." And as he finished talking, a strong heat came over the land. The sun started to burn, although it was evening. And all of a sudden, all the crops died. All the earth cracked open out of dryness. And for an entire year, the people in the village and the king and the queen, they suffered for starvation and famine. And after a year, again, after sunset one evening, the stranger came once more to the village, and he started walking through the desert streets. And once more he started banging at each and every door, and this time he was begging for water, just a glass of water to quench his thirst. The people inside the houses, they wished so much they could share some of their water with a stranger. They knew that hospitality was sacred, and so it still was in their hearts. But they were so afraid of the king's order that they did not dare to open their doors nor to give water to the stranger. Only a brave person at the end of the village, he suggested, "Try the royal palace. We cannot open our doors, we cannot quench your thirst, because if we do, our king will chop our heads." The stranger then, he climbed once more the hill where the royal palace stood, and when he got there, he knocked at the door heavily. And after some minutes of waiting, The big wooden door bursted open, and out came the king and the queen with their 3 sons and 2 dogs. As soon as he saw the stranger, the king shouted at him, "How do you dare to present yourself once more at my door, when for your fault this entire village and my kingdom have suffered starvation and famine? You have laid a curse on our village. Go away, or I will kill you." But the stranger, he looked at the king once more with peace in his eyes, and he stretched his hand and said, "Please, I only ask for a glass of water." The king, when he heard this, he came forward and he punched the man in the face, and his wife, following his example, she also came forward and she kicked the poor man, and so did the 3 sons. The 2 dogs, when they saw this, they also ran towards the man and they bit at its legs until they bled. The poor man, he turned his back to the royal family. He lifted his hands towards the sky and he said, "If there is no drink for the Son of God, for a holy man, there will be no drink for the children of man, nor for man in power." And he hadn't finished talking, that all the rivers of the land, all of a sudden, as if by magic, they started to flow backwards towards the mountains. All the lakes dried up of their water, and even the sea withdrew from the beach, leaving the land dry and thirsty for a whole year. And for a whole year, the people of the village suffered for both thirst and famine. And after another year, it was evening, and the people of the village were starved and thirsty in their houses, still with their doors locked and their windows barred. And once more the stranger came walking across the desert streets. He looked skinnier and paler than the 2 years before, but you could still see he was a man of God. He once more started banging at each and every door, and this time he begged for a piece of wood to lit a fire against the cold of the night. And the people inside their houses, they thought, we have dry wood enough this year. We would be ready to share." But they kept their mouths shut and their doors barred because they were scared. But the stranger kept knocking at the houses of scared people, until a brave one, by the end of the village, he said, "I would like to share. But you know, we're too scared of our king. Try to go to his palace and see if you can move his heart, if you can soften his will." And the stranger, for the 3rd time, he climbed up the hill and he got to the royal palace. And once more he banged at the heavy door. He banged and banged and banged and banged until the big door bursted open. And there stood the mean king, the selfish queen, and their 3 cruel sons, and their 2 dangerous dogs. The king looked at the stranger with fire in his eyes, and he said, "How do you dare to show your face in front of me, after the entire kingdom suffered famine and thirst for your fault and your curse? Go away, or I will kill you with my bare hands." But the stranger, he went on his knees and he said, "Majesty, I'm only begging for a piece of wood to burn a little fire to keep at bay the cold of the night. And the king, he felt the shiver of the evening cold, and it made him only more furious. He came forward and he punched the man in the face, and his wife, following his example, she also came forward and she kicked the poor man, and so did the 3 sons. They beat the man almost to death. And the 2 dogs, when they saw this, they got excited about the blood and the fight, and they came forward and they started tearing the man's flesh. But this time the stranger, with great effort, he rose once more. He turned his back to the royal family, to the mean king and queen and children, and he lifted his arms towards the sky and he said, "This time the people of this village have suffered enough. So if there is no fire to warm the Son of God, a holy man, there will be no warmth for the king and queen of this village only, and for their family and for their dogs." And as he said this, all of a sudden, from nowhere, a very cold wind started to blow. It was as sharp as a blade, and it started blowing around the king and queen and their sons only. The wind blew and blew stronger and stronger and stronger, and it was as if a whip was taking away the warmth of their bodies. And the king and queen, first they shivered, and then they froze. They felt no more their arms, their legs, their head, their torso. Cold pierced their brain, their heart, their veins, their blood. And they felt that they were growing and growing and growing and growing and hardening and hardening until they became mountains. 2 higher peaks surrounded by 3 lower ones, with 2 hills at their side. The royal family and their dogs became rocks. And from that day on, the village, it's not overlooking the sea anymore, because the 5 mountains and 2 hills prevent the sight of the sea. And the people of the village call them the rock-hearted family, because this is how they were. They had a stone instead of the heart. And the stone heart family is still there if you visit the village. But the houses are open. The windows are smiling at the foreigners. And the people have become once more the most hospitable people of Italy. And if you go there any time of day and night, you can be sure they always have an extra dish of food for you, an extra glass to drink. They always have a nice warm place close to their fire, and they welcome family, friends, and even strangers. This is my wish for this Ramadan and for all people on earth in this 2020, that we can go back to hospitality and open houses.